There you go. I've been talking while my mic has been muted. What I was saying is I was supposed to show the something more promotional video, but for some reason I can't get the tech working, but that's okay. You've got me. I just want to say a couple of things, guys, ever so quickly. If you could share this post, we would really, really appreciate it. Also, guys, make sure you stick some comments and some questions in the comment section below. I see that Colin is watching from the Wirral. I was tempted to ask him if he was a Liverpool supporter or an Everton supporter. He might want to tell me. He might want to tell me he supports someone else entirely. Hey to Katie as well, guys. If you've got any questions, you stick them in there. Want to let you know as well that next week on the Something More podcast, there's a bit of a change to our schedule. We are going to be talking about immigration and asylum. And the reason why we're going to be doing that is because of some high-profile things that have been happening within the media. But the Something More podcast happens every Monday night at 7:30, and it's run by Hope Church Lancaster. And we basically just have various different speakers on to talk about different issues, and we're looking at what it is to be human and what it is to be more human, particularly in this time of lockdown. So I'm going to introduce tonight's guest, and that is Ian Thomas. So Ian, bro, how are you doing?
Hey, good to see you again. I'm well, thank you. I'm well. I'm excited to be here. I've not been on a Christian podcast before, so I'm really happy to be here. And thank you for inviting me. Today's a good day because I can eat and people love me, right?
Hallelujah, amen to that, buddy. Colin is neither a man. Colin is neither a Liverpool or an Everton fan. So, Colin, do you follow football at all? We're not judging you if you don't. Saying that I don't really follow football anymore. I've got a wife and 3 kids, and that's who I support these days. But
Colin Chatton. Sorry, Colin Chatton. He's a good friend of mine. He's a foster carer and a good foster carer at that, and advocates a lot for children and young people's well-being.
Oh, does he? Yeah. Well, big shout out to Colin. Big shout out to Amy and Chris who are watching as well. No, it's rubbish. Boxing is the one. I love boxing. I absolutely, well, again, I don't follow it anymore, but I was a huge boxing fan in the Mike Tyson years. And then he got beat by James Buster Douglas, and it just ruined boxing for me. So who do you think is going to win, the Gypsy King or AJ? So there you go. There's the question. Ian, I better stop there, and I better start with you. Ian, why don't you tell these guys how we met?
Funnily enough, Sport, we met in the gym. I'd say it was about 6-7 years ago. Steve, would you say it was that?
Yeah, it was some time ago.
And I just remember that you were always a really friendly, personable, warm guy. And I was really surprised when you told me you were a pastor, because it challenged my stereotypes, because I'm someone that, as part of a conditioned society to see people in certain ways, I too invest into that and subscribe to preconceived ideas that just don't belong to me. And one of those was that an Asian guy would not be a Christian, and he would definitely not be a pastor. And he probably wouldn't be from Scotland either. And when we got talking, I was just like, this guy's he's really on fire. He's really warm. He's really kind. There's something about him. And you challenged my stereotype. And I'm grateful for that, because I try and advocate that we all challenge stereotypes as well. And so, yeah. And then I think we did some training together. Didn't I help you with some weights or something? Your biggest set?
Well, my seated shoulder press on dumbbells. Yes, I lifted my biggest ever weight when you were spotting me. So I've never ever got back to that before. But I'm training in the garage now. I don't train in the gym because of lockdown and because of the family and stuff. So have you been training during all of this? Have you just been training at home?
Yeah, no, I had loads of time off, and then I hit the push bike and running around the fields and the canals, and got shin splints. So I've had to ease up on the running, but my cardio's got good. So I've been doing a lot of clean and press, burpees, sort of circuit stuff, high intensity. And I must admit, I used to struggle with that when I was younger, and I used to want to do the weights. And I think that since I've done some weights today, funnily enough, and it didn't interest me as much because it wasn't as intense. I kind of got a little bit bored. It felt, it wasn't getting my heart rate up enough. So I think I need to try and find a happy medium. But I couldn't keep lifting all those heavy weights, Steve. I just get injuries now. I'm into my 30s, and it's a very sort of externalization focus, isn't it, weightlifting? And I think it's more about being healthy now than looking buff and all the stuff that my ego wanted to do.
Yeah, well, I went the other way. I was like really big in cardio in my younger days. Used to do football, used to box. Colin reckons AJ is going to beat the Gypsy King. He probably will, but I'd love to see the Gypsy King win anyway. Yeah. So I hit weights now just because it's a lot shorter. So I don't spend anywhere near as much time training as I once did. But like you said, I'm getting older, and other things are a lot more important. Ian, why don't you tell me a little bit about what life was like growing up for you, buddy?
Yeah, my life was, it was probably a little bit different to what most people would experience. I grew up in foster care. Came from a family that had an array of challenges. And as a result of that, I ended up in the care system.
How old were you?
I was 9 when I went into care. 9 years old. Yeah, quite young. And I think that was an important part of my life, not just sort of in terms of where I lived, but kind of psychologically and emotionally and probably spiritually. And I think around the age of 8, I kind of lost a lot of hope, because my relationship broke down with my mum, and and kind of like my world sort of felt quite crushed when that stopped becoming a safe space for me after relentlessly trying to invest in that to be a safe place for me. And then where I felt so unsafe in the world, I kind of, with that came an array of behaviors and ways of seeing and thinking and sort of psychological constructs that, would use to strategize my way through it that prevented me from being close to people. And as a result of that, my behavior was quite challenging. I was contending with trauma, loss, abandonment, rejection, all those things, attachment. And, I probably wasn't an easy child to look after, like lots of children in care, have experienced those things. We present behaviors that make decision makers difficult, and foster care is difficult. And that's why the role at foster care is just so important. Hence why I was bigging up Colin just there, because he's one of those guys that's been doing that for a long, long time amongst watching boxing. So, and I lived with around 20 families, several children's homes.
And just go back a second. So can I ask, were you placed into care, or did she put you into care?
I was placed into care. I went to school one day. I had a conversation with a social worker at school, and then they put me in a children's home.
Right. Wow. Wow. And what was that like? So you hit the ground. You're green. Never been in care before. So what was that like?
I felt like I could confide in the other young people more than I could the staff. They didn't. There wasn't like a warmth or a sense of care from them. It felt very sort of clinical and sort of routine,
Yeah.
like you're on a conveyor belt.
Yeah.
These are the rules. This sort of time you've got to go to bed. This is how much pocket money you get. This is when dinner is. It was a machine. It was an Thank you, Steve. It was an institution. That's exactly what it was, you know. And then I, you know, so the older kids were where I went to for that kind of, you know, where I felt I could gravitate towards if I needed anything. And then I had to try and navigate whether they would bully me or try and parent me because I was one of the youngest children in the institution.
Yeah. And did you see it as a predominantly positive or negative experience, or was it a little bit of both? And if so, give us some examples.
Yeah, so I think that it was a competitive environment because there's young people, you know, who have got, you know, a world of who are emotionally challenged.
Was it all male? Like, what was the age range?
Mixed. So boys and girls, you know, and you know, all these young kids up to the age of sort of 15 and 9. I was the youngest, but most of them were like 13, 14, 15. And when you're 9, a 13-year-old that's kind of like been fully exposed to adult world, and once you expose a child to an adult world, you can't unexpose them. That's it. They know about it then, you know, and you know, and they were smoking and drinking and all these sort of things, and you know, and I had to kind of like navigate that, whether they'd sort of bully me and push me around to vent their own frustrations and pain, or would they try and kind of take me under their wing and look after me. And I think having lived in an abusive household as well as a smaller child, you know, you become quite intuitive. It's like a muscle that you grow and develop because it's detrimental to your survival. That's why, you know, a lot of people in recovery from addiction or care leavers, you know, people who experience trauma that you know, although they are challenged in some respects, they also come with quite intuitive people, you know, and I think that the experiences were, you know, I remember one experience is a lady called Elaine who sometimes put me to bed and she'd tell me stories about when she was on her motorbike, and I always used to feel connected and cared for by her. Then there were other staff members that would just give you a completely different experience, and if you fought with the other kids, you got restrained and they would sit on you, and you know, all of that's illegal now, but then it was sort of grey lines. You know, there's lots of legislation and sort of policy around non-violent intervention when working with young people or people in any institution, you know. So I can remember being locked in a room and fighting for what felt like hours with one of my peers, you know, and then I can remember kind of people, you know, extending acts of kindness to me. But I guess what happened for me then, you know, was I disconnected from myself, you know, I unplugged emotionally, you know, and I kind of.
Why or how? I mean, you know, was that because of the trauma, or were there other factors in there?
Yeah, so I think that when my relationship broke down with my mum, I unplugged from self and people around me. And I was so frightened to have any meaningful relationship that I decided not to, subconsciously. It wasn't a conscious thing, you know. I wouldn't have had the intellectual capacity at that age to be able to make a decision like that, or the emotional strength. It you know, and it's a bit like attachment. You know, there's a label that social workers use, attachment disorders, but I'd say that it was an organised response to a disorganised environment. You know, it makes logical sense for me to step back, unplug, and don't be close to anybody. And I'd probably say that my adult, you know, journey, and we'll unpack some more of that, I'm sure, has probably been what I would call the longest journey in the world, and that's just 12 inches, and that's from my head to my heart. You know, and I can be intellectual, and that's a terrible gift, Steve, you know, because, you know, that is born from a child that is choosing not to have meaningful relationships because those meaningful relationships have been too painful to survive. And when my relationship broke down with my mum as a child, you know, that's just how I operated from then on out. And I bounced through the care system, strategizing my way through relationships, desperately not wanting to be close to anyone or having a meaningful relationship. And when anything became valuable to me, fear and anxiety of loss and abandonment would overwhelm me. And I contend with a compulsion to act out negatively to destroy that relationship because it's too painful having something meaningful and the concept of losing it and going through that over and over again.
I was speaking to someone today who founded a mental health charity in Lancaster, and she's been involved in mental health and counselling for some time. She's worked in prisons. She's worked with people with mental health issues, and she was telling me about a particular person that they try to help. And to cut a long story short, and to protect kind of people involved, something happens, and eventually that person went to prison, and she went to visit them in prison and to speak to them, and they were like, look, you actually think that everybody knows how to receive love? We don't. And it just blew her away, absolutely blew her away, because she thought, if we as a team, if we help them do this, and if we help them do that, and if we get a win there, and if we get a win there, and if we build that relationship and we build community, but she didn't realize how far she had to go back. So I pushed her on that and said, look, so what was it? And she said, look, Steve, it all goes back to childhood, and it was really profound. And she was saying, look, there's so much more work that has to be done if things have been damaged within childhood.
Well, you're a guy that's been on the journey. You've had an experience, and maybe you probably say, by the grace of God, you're here, because by the grace of God go I. That's how I feel, and I guess you've probably had that journey of, how did you learn to receive love, even though it was there?
Yeah, so I had a really troubled childhood. I mean, there are aspects, and I should have said this to you at the beginning. If there's any questions that you don't want to answer, then please feel free not to answer them. Yeah. My childhood was incredibly dysfunctional. I was saying to my wife, who's watching, Abigail, I love you. I was saying to my wife recently.
Hi, Abigail.
Hey, Abigail. Boys, you better be in bed. I was saying to Abigail recently, my wife. I probably went to about 12 primary schools, and so we moved around a lot. My dad was what would now be called a career criminal. My dad was incredibly violent and aggressive, not always to us, but there was domestic abuse, domestic violence in the home. But violence was something that was celebrated. Like my dad, like he would carry a hammer within the car. He would carry like a screwdriver on his person. Do you get what I mean? It was like, so there were things I saw. I remember my parents, there was a guy who lived across the road. We had a chip shop at this point. I was going to say his name. I won't say his name, but he had grassed somebody in and his house got petrol bombed. And I remember witnessing this. I remember the chip shop we had got ram raided. I remember guys who I went to school with committing suicide. I could just give you a whole list, and I just got really jaded and really skeptical. And I guess I went on the same sort of journey that you were on. Obviously, drink and drugs all were involved in that. And I honestly didn't think that I could trust anybody. It was like the instincts of an animal. And at one part, it was a spiritual experience. I went to church. I had this profound spiritual experience, but I met people which left school with qualifications and they went to university, and I met people who weren't, promiscuous. Well, I was 14 years old and 13, and we was like sneaking into clubs and we were doing drugs, and then to meet people like Christian people, like who didn't do that, it was weird, because everything I knew, like where I grew up, that's what we did, and I didn't know that there was a different way to think and a different way to live. Do you get me?
Like massively. And I guess for me, like a lot of my journey is as an adult is trying to like understand the internal and external factors that were surrounding me, the sociological and psychological elements that were kind of, perpetuating me into those systems of ways of thinking, being and seeing, belief systems that I subscribed to that became the engine that drove all that thinking and behavior. And I think that, and when you said the hammer in the car and the screwdriver, that's just resonated with me so much. I remember getting arrested with a knife at 13 years old. It's still on my criminal record when I do an enhanced assessment. And I still, like that, just that it was just what I needed to do. And I guess it was self-perpetuating because, the way that I had to behave, Steve, which was conducive to my survival, wasn't conducive to, trying to have an open, honest discussion with you now and trying to show up to this and be a bit vulnerable and emotionally honest and try and explore, another way of seeing the world, And I guess, and like you, I had experiences as a child that were really frightening and we were poor, and there wasn't loads of opportunity and had some really sort of negative experiences that damaged me psychologically and didn't really feel loved and connected and safe, and it was consistently inconsistent. And those experiences kind of like, became the framework in which I saw the world, like this blueprint. And every time I looked at the world, I saw it through this blueprint, subjectively, and this blueprint kind of, was like the architectures of my belief systems, and my belief systems were the engine that became my drove my behavior. And every time I'd look at the world, I'd make it mean things that justified the way I behaved, so that it never felt wrong, because that's how I had to behave.
You only see the shadows and see the monsters. Holly is plugging your TED Talk. We will get onto that. And what we will try and do is get that. Well, the link's there anyway, but we'll try and get that in the description bar at a later point. So, you only see the shadows and the monsters. So you're in the care system, and some of the experiences are positive. It seems that some of them are negative. Then tell us what it's like, as you are growing up and you're becoming a man in that care system. Were there ways out? Like
I think that there was opportunity, ways out. I think that what happens is, as a looked after child, you're part of a minority group, and so you're socio-economically, disadvantaged.
And I don't know how it works, right? So, and it might work differently in different homes. Does everybody in the home go to the same school, or everyone goes to different schools? How does it work?
So different schools, and kids come and leave the home, and the idea really was that you go into the home, and when they could find you a foster family to go and live with, then you go and live with them. And the home was normally a last resort. I mean, we've got 80 years of experience and research tell us that children belong with families, and institutions, generally speaking, the outcomes are pretty, horrendous for children who grow up in institutions, which is why I do the job I do. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. But so I went off to foster families and sort of moved around and developed some sort of survival mechanisms, and those weren't conducive to kind of, a peaceful situation placement. And I remember my first foster family, and I remember they were Christians, and I'd never been exposed. When you see your first Christian praying, and one of the Christians, sometimes they're really up for it when they pray, aren't they? There's just
Can I just say before you continue, we've got some, like all families, we've got some good guys on our team, and we've got some wing nuts. So just saying.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they were the good guys.
I don't know what. So this and back in the day, foster carers were normally white middle class people. Not now anymore, thank God. Hopefully, we have a carer base that represents society and the young people that are in the care system. But I remember this foster family, and you'd only have water at the dinner table, brown pasta, lots of praying, going to church, and people screaming Jesus. And I'd never been exposed to that before, so you can only imagine, And I met a guy in Jerusalem once who was healing people, and he'd just come from Kenya, and he lived in New York. That's his home. And he was just full of the Holy Spirit. And it didn't matter what you believe personally. This guy had something. I'll never forget it. he was so far out there, you know, healing and praising and you know, being at one with God and the Spirit, that I remember saying to him, do you remember what life was like before you were a Christian? Because I was trying to remind him of what people like him looked like. And I was hoping that if I could help him remember that, it might help him engage people a little bit more skillfully, because he was that full on. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, you know, and it's, and as a recovering addict and all of those things in my personality, if I'm speaking, or someone that's in care, you know, I try and remember, well, how did I see people in my position now when I was there? And that's really important when we're trying to engage people and get alongside them and to support them. So, you know, these foster carers obviously had no awareness that a child was being placed with them that had never had any experience like this before. And it just blew my head away, really.
How old were you, and how did it go?
I was 10 years old. Every time there was an issue, we'd pray, or they would pray, you know, and I'm a big believer in prayer, but, you know, it's not that reassuring for a 10-year-old that's never heard of God, you know. Yeah, it was just a little bit messed up, really. I think their own kids were a bit kind of took back by their parents' enthusiasm for Christianity, and I don't know if they kind of really caught Holy Spirit like their parents had, and seemed to be a bit left behind. And in hindsight, I can look through the lens of an adult and see that there's probably a lot going on underneath the surface. But at the time, I just didn't connect, didn't settle, didn't plug in, didn't conform. And eventually they said, you got to leave. And they rang the social worker and off I went, you know.
And how long were you there?
Maybe 6 months, maybe.
And how did that feel? Did you own it as your failure, or?
I think that part of the issue was that I was stealing a lot of them, money to get cigarettes and sweets and stuff. And my addiction first manifested itself through stealing. You know, stealing was rarely about financial gain. It was a behavior that I could obsess about. It was very personal to me because I was the only one engaging in it and thinking about it. I never told anyone. And it was a distraction from my pain, you know, and the outcome was that I get enough money for a Refreshers bar, box of matches and 10 cigarettes. In the days you used to be able to buy 10 fags for 90 odd pence in 1996, you know, Red Band and all those. Yeah. I was one of the kids outside the shop on the estate asking the bigger kids to go and get cigarettes, wondering which one would rob me and which one would help me or which one would just tax me a few cigarettes. You know, all those skills we pick up along the way to try and navigate complex social circles for our survival. So I left there, and I mean, at the time I just saw it as another transition. I think that deep down, every time I moved on to another family, every time I experienced that rejection, even though in some situations I sought rejection, I think you lose a bit more hope, and you go on to the next place with a little bit of less hope and a little bit of less hope. And I think that as I felt less hopeless, as I felt more hopeless, my addiction and negative behaviour kind of amplified, really, and that was a form of escapism to try and not be with that pain. But the displaying behaviour would probably be that I didn't really care and I wasn't connected, and consciously I wasn't. But I now know, if I'm emotionally honest, of course I was affected. I was really hurting.
Yeah. So. Like, how old were you when you left care? And how did that go about? I mean, like, were you getting in trouble with the police? So you talked about the 13-year-old knife incident. You know.
Yeah. So I've been arrested about 35 times in total. You know, and I started getting arrested when I was 10. So as soon as I hit 10.5, that's when I started getting arrested, because you are criminally responsible at the age of 10.5. And that's only possible in this country because of the Jamie Bolger case, the serious case review. Horrendous situation happened, you know, and that's what brought the legislation down. And I think that that's quite a unique situation. And as a result,
in Scotland, you could get away with anything till you were 16. So like, I got busted. I've got a juvenile record, but like, unless it was serious stuff, because Scotland, the legal system's slightly different than the English one. So a lot of us, particularly, you know, one of the ways in which drug dealers would shift stuff is they were always going to be light on you if you were under the age of 16. Do you know what I mean?
Well, it's like county lines, isn't it? It's happening again, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I guess consequences for a 13-year-old are still less than for a 20-year-old, and that's part of the exploitation that we're trying to work with, isn't it? And tackle. But I guess because of that legislation being brought down to 10.5 because of the serious case review, it meant that a lot of 10-year-olds could suddenly be arrested for things that weren't murder and weren't serious offences. They were part of adolescence, and as a result of that, they were being criminalised. And and I remember my first offence was assault. We were trying to barricade the door in one of the children's homes from the staff. Were in conflict, and I threw a table leg and it hit a lady over the head, and I was arrested for that. And then theft and criminal damage and that sort of stuff. And then while these are serious offences, if a grown man is committing them, when you've got a 10-year-old boy that's kind of bouncing around the system and feeling really frightened all the time, I'm not sure if it warrants a 999 call. Yeah. And when I look at 10-year-olds now, I feel quite strongly about that. And just to put a bit of statistics in there for you, Steve, there's 85,000 people in prison at any given time, and 27% of that prison population are former looked after children that we know of. I think the data is more, but it's not easy data to get because it's a really hard group of people to engage. And it costs like £119,000 to send someone to prison from the point they get in conflict with the law to the minute they get behind the prison door, and £40,000 a year to incarcerate them for 12 months. So, there's a real strong economic argument there as well as a social and moral one. And it's not a coincidence that over, a third of our prison population are former looked after children. And that goes to show that they are a minority group who are severely discriminated against and collectively oppressed, and their life chances are so much less than average. And I think that's just really important for people to know when we're trying to support children in care and care leavers.
It's moving from one institution to another. That's all it is. And it's about teaching them to live in a de-institutionalized way. So yeah, can I get a witness? So I'm actually moving on to prison ministry. That's what I'm going to be doing next. Did you know that?
Well, so we need to keep talking then, won't we?
We do. So how did you leave? And did you leave and end up going to prison, or how did it work? So how old were you when you left the care system?
It was a week before my 17th birthday, so I was 16. I was put in a house with supported accommodation. The support consisted of someone coming to see me 1 hour a week. And that was it, really. It wasn't very supportive, but people were trying to reach out to me. I understand that now, and I wasn't receptive to that really at all. Quite disenfranchised, suspicious and distrusting. Contending with a real deep sense of loneliness that felt just so inconsolable. And, I remember social workers ringing me up sort of saying, Ian, are you okay? And from the fostering agency that I was attached to at the time. And I left care because the foster home had broken down and there was nowhere else to put me anymore.
Yeah.
And I just felt quite frightened really. And I was really, really unprepared for life. No real life skills at all. Yeah. So go on, bro.
Yeah, no. So you leave at 17. They've put you in this kind of housing, assisted housing of whatever kind it's like. So pick up the story from there. So what happens as you hit the real world? What do you start to do? What does life look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I got, I remember I got a job at a Harley Davidson place.
Did you? That's kind of cool.
Yeah. I was cleaning the bikes and, kind of stuff. And then I kind of got in with some bikers and stuff. And, that introduced me to some other areas of life that probably weren't that conducive to staying out of trouble.
Yeah, sure.
I got involved in sort of drugs, and kind of, buying and selling really on a very small scale, but in a way that kind of funded my own habit, gave me a little bit of sort of social acceptability within those remits, and kind of a bit of a way of surviving, and then I kind of just got wrapped up in that. And by now, Class A drugs were very much a big part of my life, a big part of my focus. It's very much what I wanted to be involved in. I felt that kind of drugs were the solution to all my difficulties. You know, it just took the pain away, really. And
what kind of drugs were you using?
Back then, crack cocaine, ecstasy, cocaine, you know, powder, and loads of puff. I smoked a lot of puff at that age. Like, I was a real stoner when I was like 15. You know, I probably lost the summer to that stuff. You know, sat in a room listening to Cypress Hill playing Xbox with my mate. You remember the one? You know.
Yeah, mate. I was like Nintendo 64, lots of weed. You know what I'm saying? It was Tupac and yeah.
GoldenEye was the game for that.
Oh, GoldenEye. Yep, GoldenEye. Yeah. I remember all of that. Yeah. And the Beatles were getting big.
Yeah.
Oh, not the Beatles, Oasis. Sorry.
I was thinking, this is a joke. Yeah.
No, Oasis. Yeah. I remember those years. I wasted those years. Yeah. So the drugs, are they fastly becoming out of control, or is it just kind of recreational at this point and a bit therapeutic?
Fastly becoming out of control. I mean, I think that my first sort of crash on Class A.
No one's an addict. Everybody else is an addict, isn't it? Until you,
this is it.
Everyone's an addict except you.
This is it. You're the only one that can say you're an addict, but you're always the last to find out, Steve. You know.
Yeah.
That's the problem. But yeah, ecstasy was a big drug for me, because when I took an ecstasy tablet, I felt worthy of receiving love. I felt connected. I felt plugged in. I felt, you know, all the things I wasn't. You know, and it just took it all away. And I never really took drugs because, you know, for fun. It was more because I couldn't bear to be alive without a sense of relief for that suffering. And even before I took drugs, there was behaviors that represented me trying to escape that sense of loneliness and sadness that felt so inconsolable.
So would the term self-medicating describe it?
Yeah,
because and for those who don't know, one of the terms which is often used is self-medicating, in which you don't have the access to counseling, you don't have the access to you know, some of the kind of mental health services and the mental health drugs, and you turn to a substitute. I think that's a fair sort of.
Yeah. And I think we kind of live in very much, in some respects, an addicted society. You know, if we think about, you know, the concept of pleasure and happiness and how they're very different, and yet we see a lot of people, myself, seeking happiness through the paradigms of pleasure. And I can be miserable and experience pleasure, and I denote pleasure to be a positive experience, and I get trapped in that cycle, you know, in a belief system that if I just get enough pleasure, I will be happy, I will be content, I will be okay. And it convinces me time and time again. And you know, if it's not been, you know, Class A drugs, it's been you know, impulsive relationships, shopping, trainers, food, gym, pornography, you know, work, you know, learning, reading, you know, kind of exercise, like, you know, anything that might change the way I feel, make me feel a little bit better. I'm vulnerable to getting an obsession about that, and then contending with a compulsion to act out on that obsession, and normally making sacrifices that I never really planned to, and experiencing some kind of unmanageability internally and externally. And you know, if it gets down the road far enough, you know, I end up bankrupt emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. And it always costs me more than money. I always hurt people when I don't mean to. And ultimately, I abandon the human being within, Steve. You know, I really abandon myself. And I come out of that feeling really ashamed, really frightened, really disconnected. And the go-to thing each and every time is to do it again, because it's the only thing that will take it away instantly, you know. But it's not a quick fix, is it? It's just not a quick fix, you know.
No, it costs a lot more than how much you pay for the bag or the pill, doesn't it? So you know, is it from there you went onto the street, or did you end up in prison? I'm trying to follow the chronology here a little.
Oh, the chronology. Okay, let's go for a chronology. It's always good to have a chronology. Cause and effect, A to B.
Guys, let me just stop you there. Sorry, quickly, Ian. Guys, if you've got any questions or comments, guys, make sure you stick that in the comment section, and we should be able to deal with those questions. Obviously, we want you to engage, but we also, if there's a direction which you want us to take this in, it will be useful for us to know as well. So yeah, Ian, pick up on the chronology.
Okay, chronology. So I left the care system, went into supported accommodation, and kicked around for a bit, and then went and lived with an auntie for a bit who just had a completely different value system to mine, different philosophy to life and ideas.
And you've stopped speaking to your mother entirely. You've cut her out your life, or
yeah, I didn't really have much to do with much of my family. I just felt that my family just didn't feel that warm to me. I think in hindsight they were probably frightened of me, and maybe didn't really get me, understand me, and probably still don't in a lot of respects, and I was never able to show up to any of those relationships. I still feel like they've never met me because I'm unable to show up because, I feel so unsafe and so uncomfortable, around family, and it's a real like work in progress for me. And I've realized that a lot of people do feel like that around their family now. And, and I think that generations have changed so much. I wonder if that has something to do with it. And a lot of the thoughts and feelings and, experiences I have aren't, individual to someone that's been through addiction or the care system. It's just the way it goes. And some of us are better at dealing with it than others, and so it didn't really work out at my auntie's, and I'm probably quite glad it didn't, because I wouldn't have wanted to, live that life and see the world that way. So I left, and hostels and youth hostels and key foyers and YMCAs, and and there was no dancing in those places. It wasn't pleasant, and then just my addiction kind of took over, and I ended up in prison. I remember I got arrested at 18, crashed a car, driving whilst disqualified and all this, and I ended up in HMP Dorchester, and then HMP YOI Young Offenders Institution in Portland, which is like a young offenders prison on like this rock off Weymouth, like an island with one road going to it. And
I know it, yeah.
Massive culture shock, and in and out of prison, Steve.
So prison, like, did you feel quite, inverted commas, well prepared for prison because you'd been in an institution before, so you kind of understood the social dynamics? And
although I didn't like the psychology, I understood it. It made sense. I didn't agree with it, didn't like it, and I could see it for what it was, and I could see the edges of it. But it made sense. I could work it out. And the way that you have to behave in prison, like I said earlier, which is conducive to your survival in prison, isn't conducive to not going back to prison and, a road to sort of spiritual growth, acceptance, love, and all these principles that we try and adhere to now, and just like at foster homes or wherever I was, I couldn't rock up to the breakfast table and say, I feel really unworthy of receiving love today. The system isn't designed for that. The prison system, the justice system, it's like very monolithic. It's heavy. It's a big machine. It's slow to move. Doesn't particularly welcome change, and sort of solipsistic by nature. Doesn't really consider much outside of itself. It's very much its own world, its own reality, its own version of consciousness that is not conducive to authentic human connection and genuine solutions to human suffering. The prison system is just not prepared to respond to that. And I think that, we probably need a reform. And out of the 85,000 people in prison, 70-something% of those are in for drug and alcohol related crimes. So they're all out there seeking painkillers in one form or another. Like we've established that we take drink and drugs because we're in pain. So we've got a lot of people in prison because they're trying to take painkillers, if you want to look at it simply. And a lot of people have little or no education, in terms of academic achievement and schooling experience. So, and often, low academic attainment is related to kind of an underclass of people that have had less opportunity, less money. So there's poverty, and the socioeconomic disadvantage is huge. So, the population of prison, is just a bunch of people who probably quite frightened, disconnected, disenfranchised, desperately trying to escape their pain and just, you know, want something differently, but they're stuck on a conveyor belt that knows no other way. And that was.
So when you're in there, do you find any kind of rays of hope, or like some people talk about the rock bottom experience? Was prison it for you?
I think my problem with prison with me was my life outside of prison was, you know,
Worse.
Getting worse than in prison, and that's a really sorry state of affairs. So every time I got sent to prison, I felt a sense of relief come over me. And sometimes I didn't want to leave, because when the door shut at night time and I got 3 meals a day and a book and some tobacco and I can read and get my head down, I felt this sense of warmth and contentment come over me. Not warmth, that's probably not true, but a sense of contentment, because, you know, nobody could hurt me more than I could hurt myself. And prison prevented me from hurting myself. But it was a painful environment, and that in itself had psychological, you know, implications to me and all the people we put in prison. And I'd like to present to you an idea, Steve. So, you know, if you put a baby in an incubator when it's born, you know, and give the baby food, you know, to nourish and nurture physical development, parts of the baby's brain won't develop if it doesn't get a physical touch, even if you give it the food. Okay. Now, you know, in some cases, more serious cases, the baby will die, even if you give the baby physical food, everything it needs, nourishment, nutrients, vitamins. It will die if it doesn't get a physical touch. So we need human connection. And this is a concept called the biopsychosocial model, where the biology of the brain is impacted by psychological and sociological factors. Now, so if we know that human disconnection, you know, it impacts sort of brain development, brain damage, you know, attachment disorders, drivers for addiction, trauma, pain, you know, all the things we've talked about up until now, then when we reject someone from society and incarcerate them, which confirms all the negative belief systems they have about themselves, because it's a further rejection, remembering that our belief systems are the engine that drives all that behavior. How are we going to move into, you know, solutions for human suffering that prevent people from going back to prison? And you know, you don't even have to like people who are going to prison. You just have to see the money that we're all spending to send them there and it not helping them. And I was one of those people. And I couldn't get out of that cycle, Steve. I was frightened, you know, and that's the only thing I could see for me. And I got arrested when I was, and this was the rock bottom you were asking me about, you know.
Yeah, but because most, I say, of us, right? Obviously, our stories are different, and our journeys are very, very different. But most of us have to hit rock bottom.
Yeah. What was your rock bottom?
What was my rock bottom? We made a New Year's resolution, me and my twin brother, to be on drugs every single day. So
brilliant.
I know. So round about December time, so we were hitting, and again, I don't know what the street names are anymore, but we were hitting DFs and jellies and ketamine and acid and mushrooms and weed and, you know, smoking heroin, not shooting heroin. I was never really into uppers. I never really did. Cocaine was too expensive. It was about 60, 70 quid back then. I never really did uppers because I wanted to feel miserable, or I wanted to be tripping out my box. I never wanted to be, I just didn't feel worthy of that. And the line between what was real and what was a hallucinogenic trip was just, it was just dissolving. And what was just a little bit of fun, like getting into fights and stuff like that, was just getting it out of control. So I'll give you an example. A mate of mine's contacted me who I've not spoken to for years. And I was like, flipping out, what happened to you? Blah, blah, blah. Like he went to prison for armed robbery. Another mate of mine's, he went to prison for 2 murders. Another guy I grew up with, like he hung himself and committed suicide. So things were just getting absolutely out of control. And I was just looking for any hope. I was the kind of guy who I would talk to the Jehovah's Witnesses and said, look, talk to me, tell me, where is there hope? Do you get what I mean? And I was like, yeah, a load of rubbish or whatever. And I was just madly in search of something. And then the day it changed, I mean, I'm supposed to be interviewing you. The day it changed, I remember the day it changed. Me and my twin brother, we had a bad trip and we just smashed the house up. And the girl I was dating at the time, Francis, and the girl he was dating at the time, Karen, they kind of split because they were just freaked out by it. And then my mum came home. I think, I don't know if she spoke to us the next day. I can't remember. Everything was a bit flipping. I was tripped out my mind all the time. Anyway, and just off my head. And anyway, she said to us, maybe it was the next morning or whatever. She said, look, you're coming to church with us. And we're like, what do you mean going to church? You don't even blink and go to church. And we thought she was going to kick us out. And she says, look, over the years, I've come across people and their lives have fallen apart and they've found hope in this whole Jesus thing. I think you should try it. It's at least worth a try. So me and my twin brother, we rocked up to church, smoked a spliff outside, had no interest in going in there. Like some guy who my brother chased through the street with a knife for grassing someone in, went into the church, and we're like, there's no way we're going in there. And we went, and I can tell you what, Ian, and it's weird because I'm a preacher, right? And we do church all the time, and this doesn't happen all the time, and it doesn't happen for everyone. But for us, there was some weird power there. And that was the beginning of a transformation. There was just something different. Like the air was, I would call it the Holy Spirit now. The air was just alive with hope and opportunity and possibility. And that was the big change for me.
That's really, really beautiful. Like hope, possibility, and opportunity. And I think they're really good ingredients, aren't they, to engage people, to try and think about doing something different.
Yeah, yeah.
And I hope that I can contribute to cultivating those kind of, environments where, that's on offer for people. That's really, really nice. And what about your brother? Where's your brother?
You never believe it now. My brother's like busted knife charges, all sorts of stuff. He's a blinking businessman and entrepreneur now. So he's doing really, really well. 2 kids, both in private school. He lives abroad. Like sometimes, and I've had this conversation with him. I have to remind myself sometimes that we were in hell because I forget. I honestly forget. And it's good sometimes to remind yourself because you forget how much suffering and pain there is in the world. Like I've got a wife, I've got a kid, I've got a nice, a couple of kids, 3 now. Abby, sorry. So life's pretty easy and it's pretty comfortable and it's pretty cushy. So I forget sometimes, and the people I hang around with who I love you guys. A lot of the guys, I'm not saying that guys don't have challenge. We have guys within our church. We do work with people in recovery and stuff like that. But some of the issues we face as pastors, or I face, are nowhere near as dark as some of the stuff that I grew up with and I saw every day. I just saw it every day. Do you know what I
mean? Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah. And I wonder, I think about transformation a lot. I think about rehabilitation, which is a word that, is interesting. But, what does it take? Because, a lot of people kind of step into churches and they don't have that spiritual experience, and I've sat on the prison floor, cried out to Jesus and asked for the Holy Spirit to save me because, a priest had promised me that 20 minutes before on a Sunday morning church service in prison. And I just knew I was getting out of prison. I knew I was going to use again. And I know the argument for me is, well, look, Ian, you're here now and that was part of your journey and God needed to take you on a journey. But there are those that call out to God and God, I've seen people ask God for help. I see they do the right things. Is it something going on with them in their heart? Are they not receptive to God's grace? Do we all have God's grace? Is it selective? Like I think about that a lot. And
do you know, Ian, honestly, like there are multiple reasons, but for me, like at the core of it, we need to get back to you. But at the core of it, do you know what? More than anything, it's community. It's community. Like I knew what it was for the first time to feel true brotherhood, and I don't mean like. That there was that sense of it because we all hung out with each other and we all got into fights and all that, but like genuine, true but also wholesome brotherhood, and just that wholesome challenge saying, yo, Steve, you're better than that, man. Come on. And father, I never heard a dad having older guys in the church. I mean, there was a guy, hopefully he doesn't watch, but I used to call him Dunkin' Donuts because he was a big fella. And Dunkin' Donuts, man, he was just awesome. And he just was like, yo, well, no, he didn't speak like that, but he was very, he was like, look, this is what it means to be a man. You know, sit up straight. You don't need all those sovereigns, man. You don't need to walk with so much swag. Do you know what I mean? You know, you don't have to be so suspicious all of the time. And having people like that in my life, like dads and brothers in Jesus and mums in Jesus as well, you know, like for me, that was the powerful thing that brought the transformation. And sometimes I think we see salvation is so individualistic. You know what? You need your crew. You need your crew.
Do you know what? I think that is probably the most constructive answer I've ever heard from a Christian, and one that just completely resonates with everything I know, personally, professionally, spiritually. You know, and I'm really grateful for that, because, you know, and I get the whole thing about spiritual brotherhood, spiritual motherhood, you know, and it's the difference between, you know, yeah, bro, I've got your back, or I've got your spirit, I've got your interests. I've got genuine, authentic care for you. I'm interested in your internal world. I'm not interested in the outside stuff or what it means to anyone else, or the superficial world we live in that we invest in with our five senses, you know, and I get that. I got a friend, Yusuf, you know, and saying that he's a friend feels like I'm doing that relationship such a you know, Yusuf, the Asian guy I used to train with the beard. Yeah. So he's a social worker like me, and I love that man with all my heart. And it's because of him, because of that relationship, that I believe that it's possible that somebody might want to love me.
Yeah,
you know. And when I look into his eyes, you know, I don't feel frightened, and I can tell him I love him, and I'm convinced that he loves me. I'm convinced, you know, and I feel that God speaks to me through people, you know, community, common unity, you know, and what you said is just beautiful, man. I love that. Yeah, amen. You know, I don't say that word a lot.
We need family, man. We need family. We need brothers. I've got a question here from Holly. Holly said, question for later. We will look at it now. I'm going to have to ask, love you guys. Keep the questions short because it does obscure us. So I have to kind of, but no, it's all good. It's all good. More and more so, kids are staying at home well into their 20s while they find their way in life, but looked after children are often discharged at 18 with little support, community or family environment. Do you think there should be policy changes and more appropriate services available for this stage of their lives to help even the odds for opportunity, well-being and productive lives? So over to you.
That's a really good question, Holly. Holly is someone else I love very much. Yeah. Holly's a beautiful human being, you know, and her late husband, Pete Felton, passed away this year just before lockdown. And if we could all send our prayers to Pete's soul and that he's with God, and Holly and his family, you know. But you're right, Holly, you know, people leave care at a huge disadvantage, and it's really frightening about, you know, what they have to kind of contend with and what they have to know about the world in order to survive. And I'm 34 and I'm still bloody contending with that stuff, you know, and I don't know if there's a static accomplishment. So, and even the most resilient, you know, well-prepared children who have had all the foundations of life one could wish for, still, if they had to leave home at 18, they would still be at a huge disadvantage, let alone the journey that they've had to go on to get there. Now, policy change, policy reform, I completely agree with you. There was a fostering stock take, I think in 2017 or 18, by a guy called Martin Neary. And I remember having a meeting with him and some of his comrades from central government. And I advocated that, you know, what they need to do is they need to look at a policy reform around people who are leaving care, because society is changing. You know, like you said, birth children aren't leaving home until their 20s, sometimes 30s, to try and get on a property ladder or have some kind of chance of success. And Martin Neary said to me, the best thing to come out of the government in terms of children in care is the staying put policy, since the Children's Act 1989. And the staying put policy is simply this: when a child becomes 18, if they want to stay with their foster carers up until the age of 21, central government encourages local authorities to support that arrangement. And I think that is under the Children's Social Work Act. And the issue with that is that what happens is the local authority saying, well, we're not going to call you foster carers anymore. We're not going to give you the support that foster carers get. And we're not going to pay you a foster carer's allowance. What we're going to do is you're now a lodger and you can look after this young person. So it goes from a fostering agreement to a tenancy agreement for a lodger, and all the support goes. And from the day before their 18th birthday to the day after their 18th birthday, not enough changes for that arrangement to be okay. And what happens is, it deprofessionalizes foster carers because they can't be foster carers anymore, which is what they love and what they have made so many sacrifices to do. Yeah. And it's just really, really, I think it's a really poor way of responding to that challenge. So policy reform is important. My mate, Dr. Justin Rogers, did a review of leaving care in England and Australia and the USA. He did a good paper on it. And it kind of looks at the correlations and differences and stuff between kind of leaving care services in the UK. And although significant progress has been made, you get a personal advisor, you do get a leaving care allowance or a grant, to sort of set you up and stuff. And you get a few external stuff. But ultimately, the work is, where is your community? How are we supporting children to be looked after in foster care for longer? And ensuring that they have that balance. Because, Holly, quite rightly, you pointed out, we know, the social damage, that happens when we don't get this right. Domestic violence costs us something like 16 billion a year. Alcohol, drugs, prisons, homelessness, mental health issues, and a series of events can happen to anybody, but for the grace of God go I. And you can fall into any one of those sort of categories and more. So it's really important. And I do advocate for policy reform. And the policy reform that has been claimed to have had by Martin Neary isn't sufficient, doesn't represent the needs of children and young people, and is quite really it's a poor effort.
We need to get back to your story. So we want to stay on point here. So right. You are in the prison system. Things are not hitting rock bottom. Things are continuing to kind of spiral out of control. These are my words, not yours. So chip in and disagree with me if I'm getting it wrong. And then what happens? When was the rock bottom?
Yeah. So in and out of prison, I'm on the production line of justice and injustice, and kind of plead guilty, say no comment, do a bargain plea, in and out of prison, everyone gets paid, you go and get porridge. That's the deal. There wasn't really much sophisticated kind of, solutions. And so what happened was, I was 21, Steve. I was sleeping on the streets of Brighton, £200 a day, roughly, cracking heroin addiction, injecting, all veins in my arms were disappearing. I was about 8 stone in weight. The only thing that was holding me together was denial, the idea of self, that things weren't as bad as they were, this psychological coping strategy designed to keep me emotionally stable in unstable times. That's
how long were you on the streets? And
I don't know. I think probably months, because I was in and out of prison, in and out of prison, in and out of hostels and homeless shelters and stuff like that. And I remember walking the streets, not having anything to eat, anywhere to go, wondering where I was going to get a bit of money for a bit of heroin, because I was going to be really sick soon. If not, I'm feeling rough now. And that's really kind of like, soul destroying to live like that. And it's quite low, and it's a long way to go, and it's a long way to come back from. And I got arrested for nicking DVDs, and I went to the police station, and I was hoping that they would remand me and send me to prison. And I got to the solicitor, duty solicitor, and she was, there's something about, she was just quite kind. She was quite nice. She was, compassionate towards me, and I wasn't used to that, and that kind of interrupted the conveyor belt of the system, and I thought, compassion, kindness, gentleness, warmth, you're looking into my eyes with intent, you're looking into my soul, you seem to care. You seem to want me to show up to this conversation and engage with you, which wasn't, which was a new phenomenon for me, And I just remember stopping and listening, and she said something along the lines of, "Ian, love, what are you doing? Where are you going?" And she used endearing language like love, darling, sweetheart. And I remember I took a deep breath, sat back in my chair, and I breathed out, and she said, "I don't want to live like this anymore."
Yeah.
And I surrendered, Steve. I surrendered, and I threw in the towel there and then.
What happened then? So that's your rock bottom, or your alcoholics were called their moment of clarity, or whatever. What happens from that point?
Well, I was still very much wrapped up in the system, and there was only so many options that were available to me at that moment. But I think what happened was it was an internal shift. And when I said I've had enough, I don't want to live like this anymore, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. It was like a spiritual weight was lifted, and at that point, consciously, there wasn't any God intervention or God sense or God consciousness, but when I think imaginary weights, I think of spiritual weights, and it was lifted, and not that spirituality is imaginary, but and I remember just kind of having a conversation with her saying, right, I want to go to prison, and she's going, no, you can't, because the prison's too full, you're in for a shoplifting charge and it's never going to happen. So I went to the custody sergeant. I said, if you let me go, I'm going to commit crime to buy crack and heroin, and I use a lot of it. So he said, he reminded me, he was obliged to remind me, because I told him that I was going to be a risk to society if he let me go. And I knew that, and I knew I was playing the system. And they put me in this police station for a few days in London, and I was really sick, climbing the walls, and the doctor came out and he gave me like a DF. I don't know if you remember DF, and the Valium, and, it didn't even touch the sides, and I was really ill. And then I got locked up in HMP Highdown for a few months, and I had a bit of a rough ride there, trying to navigate that prison culture of being young and 8 stone and really sort of washed. And eventually I got sentenced. I got out, and I was on the run for a bit and just trying to get my life together, but never really doing it.
Were you getting clean inside, or were you still using drugs, or in that stint?
Yeah. Okay. Both. I was still using drugs, I was getting scripts and stuff, and buying in the wing and wheeling and dealing, and which immerses you into prison politics, which is never a good thing to engage in. Never Downing Street's got problems. You want to go to HMP Camp Hill or somewhere like that, that's a whole new level of politics.
Yeah, never gamble, never borrow anything, and never get involved in drug debt. Yeah.
Yeah, don't borrow, don't lend, stay out of the politics, and generally speaking, you might have a fighting chance. If you do any of those things, you will be fighting,
Yeah.
So yeah, but I guess, as the drugs are something I wanted less, and something else I wanted more, I felt more and more frightened, because what I was running from for so long, so hard, it was coming closer to me, and I was having to find daily courage, and eventually I got sentenced for all these offences that have been built up, and I remember they gave me 3 years, and I had this judge called Judge Brown, and we nicknamed him called Judge Brown Send Them Down, because apparently he was notorious for giving out heavy sentences, and I had some violence on my sheet, and I'd hurt someone and done all these mad things, and it just all caught up with me. It was all like, it was time, and I remember like hearing like lads in the prison when I was on remand going, "Oh, Judge Brown, yeah, he's really harsh," and all that, and like pretending to be like, I hope I get a squeeze, but deep down thinking, I hope he gives me a really long sentence.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'll get a life sentence, because I just felt that there was nothing outside for me anymore, and no one could hurt me more than I could hurt myself. And then eventually, I got sentenced. He gave me 3 years. And I remember stood in the dock, and I felt this overwhelming sense of disappointment, Steve. I thought, what am I going to do when I get out? And then I went to Camp Hill on the Isle of Wight, and I used to go to church every Sunday, and there was a guy there called Terry, and he was the chaplain, Terry Mann, and what a beautiful human being. And I'd meet him every Friday for a digestive biscuit and a cup of tea, not necessarily to talk about God. I'd often, being, intellectually intrigued in religion, I would sometimes, I'd contend his ideas around sort of God and stuff, and interrogate, concepts and stuff that he may have preached the previous week. But that was more out of sort of, psychological entertainment than a genuine desire to question him, and I guess.
And have you always had that inquisitive mind?
Yeah.
Our stories are similar in a lot of ways. Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I'm a bit geeky like that,
Me too. I am an absolutely closet geek. Do you know what I mean? Well, maybe I'm not.
That's why we're so fashionable.
Yeah. I just philosophy, politics, sociology, religion. Love it.
Yeah, but I think that my egos are probably a little bit more well structured than yours. I think you've probably got a bit more humility than me. So,
right.
So you're probably more interesting to talk to as me. I just want to tell you how right I am. And recently I've been trying to ask myself, am I in this arena to learn, or I am in there to regurgitate what I think I know, which is always pretty much subjective. So I'm working on that one, Steve. So
you're in the Nick. You're talking to Terry Mann, over a digestive biscuit. And like, come on, tell me, how are things going? What's happening? I mean, I want to get to the point in which we need to talk about childcare reform, and time is moving on. Do you know what I mean? So, which we have touched on.
To just speed up, I stopped using drugs. I was 100 days clean. Abstinent, and it's not easy to get clean in prison. There's a massive drug culture, and I was seeing Terry every week and going to church. And
steps. What?
I hadn't quite got there yet. But I was like white knuckling it, holding it onto the seat. And every morning I'd wake up, sit at the end of my prison bed, and I'd just pray and I'd ask God, whoever, whatever, whenever, however, just please help me not use today. Help me just get another day clean. I was so lost, and there was two things that saved me, that brought me back to life, and I think these were really, really powerful for me. So one was there was ducks in the prison ground, and it was summer, and there was little ducklings. The ducklings just reminded me of my humanity. They just there was something about the little ducklings that just reminded me that I was a human being, and then there was something in me that was worth saving, like really, really profound, so simple, but so profound for me, And the other thing was, I watched a documentary about Amy Winehouse.
Oh, yeah.
And on Channel 4, and
tragic.
It blew me away, and then at the end of it, I remember feeling really, really, really sad, and I just, I got off my prison bed, and I got on my knees and I prayed. I remember getting on my knees, and I remember asking God just to help her, help me, help anyone, just help someone, and that documentary became the springboard for me to see my own pain and my own struggle, and realize where I'd been and what I've been going through and what I've been contending with. I was able to conceptualize it by stepping out of it and looking back in, and it wasn't until I got to the end and I started praying, I thought, I'm praying for me as well. Yeah. This is not just about, like, she's just represented all my pain and that struggle, and I was really emotional and choked up, and those two things brought me back to life, really. Compassion, connection, humanity, So, and I got onto this program, 12-step program, and
is that when you left the Nick?
No, I got transferred to another prison that had it's called RAPS, Rehabilitation for Addicted Prisoners Trust, but now it's called the Forward Trust. Google it, learn about it. An amazing organization. Mike Trace is the CEO, beautiful human being. They do loads of great work, and I got onto HMP Coldenley, and I joined a community, Steve, a community of like-minded people, where I learned that there was therapeutic value in one addict identifying with another, and the pursuit to not use drugs one day at a time. That was the beginning of the end for me, and I got into recovery.
So we're going to pick up the pace just a little bit then. So then tell me about the journey into your role in foster care.
Well, so I left prison in 2009, and by 2010 October, I was engaged with the fostering agency that used to foster me, Foster Care Associates, and the chairman of that agency, the founder, and you know, it was was a real sort of maverick within the field, and I engaged with some stuff to do with care leavers, and and his wife at the time was a really compassionate woman as well that wanted to do a lot for care leavers, Jan and Jim, and so they were really committed to supporting care leavers to come and work in the field, and say, look, tell us about your experiences, engage with, it's like real sort of humility.
People, particularly with the prison record and all that, there are a lot of people who would like to close the doors. Do you know what I mean? And
I experience that now. After all I've achieved, still I get the doors, and so I kind of get engaged in that, and I worked my way through it, and showed up and did lots of things, spoke at conferences, seminar, practiced public speaking skills, learned about the system and from a professional point of view, and eventually worked full time in a regional role in Dudley when I met you about 8 years ago, whenever it was, worked my way up to a national role. I did a social work degree, left there, went to Oxford Uni to do a PhD and a master's.
Oxford, get out of here.
Yeah, man, I was in Brasenose College, living and studying in Oxford. I started the masters, but I just couldn't land, man. I couldn't settle, so I came back to the Birmingham.
Oxford or Cambridge is on my bucket list. Yeah. I will get to it. I will get to it at a later point with my life. Life's too busy at the moment. Do you know what I mean? I thought once my first son goes to school, then we had 2 other babies which came along, who are awesome, but I don't want to leave my wife with them, who she's with them most of the time. So, but anyway, I'm digressing. So
doing your ministry, right?
Oh, mate, I honestly think there is such an importance for dads. You guys play an absolutely amazing role. And even if you're not living with the mother, you guys still play an amazing role. So if you're a dad, make sure you're doing a good job as a dad. And hopefully your kids won't see half of the stuff that we've been discussing tonight. Do you know what I mean? So that's my plug for dads to be dads, So, yeah.
I like that. I like that. Yeah,
honestly, it's my most important role. Like the role I probably feel most ill-equipped at, but anyway. So right, you do your social work degree, right? So how does the kind of vision or the heart for childcare reform, how does that kind of come about? And what exactly is it you guys do? And what do you want? What do you want to see?
Well, I mean, I've always been an advocate for sort of young people, and children, young people in care, and advocated that, we need to listen to children and young people, hear about their experiences and use that to inform services that we develop around them. We need to keep listening, and that needs to inform how we, shape the future. And I guess that this is probably an extended version of that. And I guess through my own experiences, I came back to the UK and back to Birmingham after Oxford, and I started working for a charity called the Martin James Foundation, where I work now, and it's an international practice development role. And at the moment we're working with a Christian organization actually called FAM Madagascar. Check their Facebook out. And it's a Christian couple that went off to Madagascar, one of the poorest countries in the world. And they're foster carers as well. And they've they're trying to set up a fostering service there and pilot a foster care program. Wow. And we're working with UNICEF. We're working with, NGOs and Madagascar government,
Wow.
and even in the face of COVID, we've had to pivot some of our responses, but we're doing it. And part of my role is to develop fostering frameworks that are culturally adoptable and adaptable for them to start a fostering service.
So let me just go to some of these comments. I have to go to this one. You're an amazing dad. Hey, yo, cheers, Abigail. Thank you.
Your wife?
What's that?
Oh, here we go. This is Kath Butlin. This is one of the people that I told you about who's actually been working in Madagascar. Kath and John. Oh, wow.
Shall I read that comment out?
Yeah.
And then you can give me some feedback on it. Contending with a deep sense of loneliness that felt inconsolable. That phrase completely summarizes the struggle that goes on for so long during and after care, and where we, the church, can help with non-judgmental community and genuine love and friendship. Oh, you better preach that, Kath. Anyway, Your honesty of your struggles and your journey in and of itself breaks the loneliness of others who are going through the same. And the humility of coming to your knees in prayer for God to help is the first stage in the amazing. And unfortunately, because the comment's too long, I didn't get that last bit. But great comment. If you want to stick in any other points there, Kath, you stick them in. But Ian, do you want to give any comments back on that?
Just, I really like working with Kath and John. They really inspire me, and the sacrifices they make to try and, challenge long existing ideologies about childcare in Madagascar is been really inspirational. And me and my colleague, Dr. Justin Rogers, have worked really close with Kath. So I feel like I know Kath well, and to know how committed Kath is to the cause of childcare reform on an international level, and the sacrifices she's personally made with her family to receive those kind of comments is really inspiring and touching. So I'm extremely grateful. Thanks, Kath. That's like God saying, "Well done, son."
Come on. So Ian, what is it you want to see happen, and how are you going to get there? So what in international childcare reform, what does the win look like, and how are you going to get there, or how are we?
I mean, ultimately, our aim is deinstitutionalization. So, we want. God bless Steve Jakes, another good mentor of mine. He's the CEO for the international companies of Chiasis Europe. I'm sounding like I know some really cool people, and I do. I'm grateful that I know these people personally, and I'm really lucky to have Steve as a mentor over the years. Deinstitutionalization. So, we need to move away from institutionalizing children, and placing them with families. Family care needs to be the chosen alternative care. But furthermore, we need to look at how children are ending up in institutions. So we need social protection measures. So we need to be tackling poverty, domestic violence, substance misuse. Just because it's easier to put a child in an institution than it is to work with a family and try and strengthen that family to become resilient, to care for each other, it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And institutions, are really built on sort of very fallible foundations, built on Western tourism. They're built on, Western tourists going over with great intention to work and volunteer in institutions. And, they're built on sort of Western money being sent over to fund, childcare and institutions. And we know that, 80 years experience plus, that these kids, they just so cut off from society because they live in an institution, they get educated in an institution, and some of the conditions are terrible. Some of the conditions, are really good, and some of them, there's institutions that are working really hard because it is the only resort. And as a globe, we need to get around countries and support them to look at how are they keeping children safe? How are they contributing to their development, and how are they improving their life chances? And research tells us that, the pillars of successful childcare reform is good research, good policy, good pilot projects, and international, collaboration like UNICEF, NGOs like the Martin James Foundation where I work, that can kind of get along, side these countries and support them to develop, childcare reform. And it's not about doing it imperialistic. It's about, finding local people and building capacity so it's sustainable. And sustainability is about how we meet the future need. That's the overall game.
I think that's really good. I really do. I don't like this kind of imperialistic, triumphalistic. We sometimes see that within mission within the church. We go over there, make them sing our songs, with our clothes. Do you get what I mean? And it's like, what?
Come my army, Lord.
Yeah. It's like you are destroying like hundreds or maybe thousands of years of culture. Do you know what I mean? To impose upon them a different worldview. So yeah, I think that's brilliant. Taking us UK side, so care in the UK, what needs to happen? What can we do?
Well, I mean, I think that when you think internationally and you work internationally, you kind of look domestically and you think, actually, what we've got here is pretty good. Now, you know, and I think that the challenge with when you grow up in the care system, you know, it's generally not a positive experience, not necessarily because of how the system just treats you, but just the fact that you experience that isn't a positive experience. You know, you're better off with your family, right, if that's possible, and that can be facilitated safely where your needs are met. So I think that, you know, it's hard to look back at all care experience and see the positives sometimes, and even more so if there were a lot of negative experiences. But if you think about the architectures surrounding childcare, you know, from a sort of legal, cultural, you know, experiential, you know, in terms of what it's like to go through that system, you know, in the UK compared to somewhere like Madagascar, where, you know, 70% of no electricity and 90% of the country live on $1.50 a day. There is no childcare system. That's the bottom line. You know, it's very different. And you look at India, where there's like 25 million orphans, and you know, it's just like, wow, it's like 30 years worth of work ahead of us before we can even make a dent. You know, so you know, in England, I think we have some of the best legislation in the world. We are thought leaders. You know, we've got the Children's Act 1989. We've got the Working Together, you know, to keep children safe. You know, Safeguarding Children 2018, and Children and Families Act, Children's Social Work Act. You know, all these different legislations, and we've got great frameworks. We've got, you know, good legislative bodies that can, you know, inform that stuff. And I think that you know, ultimately, when you see a serious case review like Baby P, for just one that's very popular, it's not that we didn't have the right legislation in place. It's not that we didn't have the right policy in place. It's not that we didn't have the right, you know, the right qualifications for the right people in place. It's that, you know, we didn't put in place what we've already got there. We didn't implement what's already existing, you know, and I think that there are how we respond to what's there, you know, needs work, but ultimately it's not that we need something new, it's that we need to start using what we've got all the time. You know, and Munro did a review of the Child Protection Services in 2011, Eileen Munro, and she said that, you know, the problem is that we have all these systems in place, but we don't use them in a meaningful way. And she come up with what's called the proceduralization of childcare, where we do risk assessments, but we do them for the sake of doing them, as opposed to, you know, but normally when a child is seriously hurt in this country, it's because they haven't been seen alone consistently in a meaningful way. That's, you know, a lot of the serious case reviews tell us that if the child had been seen alone in a meaningful way, consistently, unannounced visits, all that stuff, you know, less children would be dead. So how do we get to not seeing the child alone in a meaningful way? Well, you know, central government, you know, and local governments, you know,
and some children don't feel listened to. I mean, you know, thinking about, you know, the issues that happened in Rochdale and stuff like that. You know, like some kids just don't feel listened to. So and some of it is growing up. Sometimes within those communities, there is a distrust of people in power, the authority figures. Do you know what I mean? So what do we do to change that?
Well, I think that, you know, professionals are overworked and under-resourced. You know, I'm a patron for BASWA, the British Association of Social Work, and I try and work with them to kind of advocate for social work and put it on the map, because, you know, social workers are game changers. They're agents of change, you know, and I think that what we need to be doing is we need to be realizing that, you know, human beings aren't subjects on a conveyor belt, you know, and I think there's a lot of good practice out there, and there's a lot of well-intended social workers out there, and you know, really inspiring people. But I think that some of the challenges is, you know, austerity measures and things like that. Anyone on the edge of the cliff already is going to fall off the cliff when you tighten up the belt. And I think that, you know, most people don't really know what social work is, but they know, and they don't know what they do, but they know what they should have done when they didn't do it, through a serious case review in the media, you know, and I think that we probably need more of a shared understanding of what, you know, social workers do, so people know that they can work with social workers. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but I don't think it's always money that's the solution. It's about, you know, time, good social work, good supervision, good support, all the things that the case reviews, you know, say that we need, and that are already in place. But you know, and I just think that ultimately we need to, employ, recruit, train, learn with, as many people as possible with lived experience, because look how this interview has gone, knowing that we've had similar experiences. There's been so much connection, hasn't there? And then
it's been powerful, actually. Yeah.
Powerful. And I think that, it's about, we need to work, there's therapeutic value. It's that community, isn't it? We sometimes need to sort of deprofessionalize and personalize, the engagement that we have with people. And this is controversial, but I think that social work is about, human rights, equality, social justice, respecting people's right to self-determination, empowerment, making yourself redundant in your role to helping them. And, through austerity measures and kind of right-wing sort of, propaganda and neoliberal policies, it kind of drains those values, and they become less important. And then, I'm worried that, the social care sector is a profession that is designed to represent the people and serve the people for the people, and may start to become or already is in some sections, one that is there to defend the state. And that's what frightens me. And that's why we need to get behind organisations like BASWA, charities like Martin James Foundation, thought leaders and thinkers in best practice like Steve Jakes from the Key Assets Group of companies, independent fostering agencies that kind of like, are challenging and reforming their own policies, and, pivot responses to COVID, community groups, mutual aid groups, community, common unity. We need to build on all of those things, and we need to, up the standards and get behind them and drive them.
It's really good. We are going to have to draw this interview to a close. I'm going to allow you, and you can do both if you can keep them short. Allow you to do a short monologue speaking to or addressing either A, social workers, or B, people who have never considered fostering. Okay, so I'm going to let you think about that for a moment. As you're thinking about that, guys, just want to remind you that the Something More podcast happens every Monday night at 7:30. We're going to be talking about immigration and asylum next week. And then after next week, we're going to move to a monthly program. So unfortunately, I can feel all those sad emojis coming up right now. But Ian, I'm going to move over to you. Give us like 1 or 2 minutes on either of those questions. If you can do both, that would be awesome. Speaking to social workers and or speaking to people who have never fostered or have never considered fostering, why should they consider it?
It's a big one. I think fostering is about, it's a caring responsibility. You'll be trusted to care for children and young people. And I think it's a very rewarding job, and it's not without its challenges. And I think it's something that needs to be thought through very seriously. But, I think it's an opportunity to get alongside someone and change their life. And if you are thinking about fostering, Google "I want to foster" and look into what's available out there. Do your research and make sure that you foster for an organisation, inquire of an organisation that's going to support you in your role as a foster carer, and kind of really do your research. But I think it's something you've got to want to do, and your family has got to be behind you. And just inquire, look in, and see what happens. I've worked with loads of foster carers up and down the country. Colin Chatton, who has been, viewing this interview, he's a great example of, what foster care can achieve, and how you can make a difference to a child or young person's life and really turn things around for them. As for social workers and anyone else, I guess, I believe there's a lot of conflict because we do not understand each other. And I think we do not understand each other because we do not entirely understand ourselves. And, when someone commits a terrible act, we blame the individual. And although I believe as human beings, we need to all be accountable for our choices, it's much deeper than that when seeking answers for cause and effect. And, if a plant does not grow, we don't blame the plant. We consider the environment, for example, water, irrigation, soil, light, to try and nurture healthy growth and development. And social work is the profession that asks that. Well, let's look at the environment. Let's look at the systems around this person and look at how we can help them. And how can we alter the environment to contribute to their development. And we need more questions like that. We need to think about each other more holistically, ourselves and our fellow human beings. And I think in modern day society does not support human kindness and healthy attachments, and we do not become disconnected of war, addiction, violence, and inhumane acts. We have all these things because we've become disconnected. And through transcending the ordinary, we can achieve extraordinary ways of responding to ourselves and one another. We can change human suffering if only we look beyond the pre-existing limited paradigms of how we understand ourselves and one another. Your thoughts are the architectures of your current conception of yourself that has landed you here today. And I think to develop a sense of self that is more conducive to a harmonized existence, we must be willing to internalize radical new ideas that require a shift in the conception of self. And that's what I had to do. I had to look at the belief systems that were the engine that was driving all that behavior, the suspicions of self, the debilitating ones and the overinflated ones, you know. And I would encourage you not to be normal. There's this meta narrative called normal. It's meant to be a description of something, but it's not. It's a subscription to a preconceived idea about how we should live that just does not represent us. So please step outside the paradigm of normal. You know, pleasure seeking, consumerism, tribe mentality, political rhetoric of a nostalgic way of living that never really existed. We must be receptive to the idea of a higher sense of self that transcends the constructs of our egos. When we are being most honest with ourselves is when we are recognizing our own pain. Thank you.
Ian, that was absolutely fantastic. God bless you, man. Thank you ever so much for your time. Guys, thank you ever so much for watching, and take care. And hopefully we will see some of you soon. See you guys. Bye.